Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you enjoy listening to these episodes as you fall asleep, and I'm truly grateful you're here. Before you fall asleep, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It's always amazing to see listeners from around the world. And if you enjoy these stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new nightmare. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin. Story 1. The first sign that something was wrong was not the tent itself. It was the fact that none of us heard it being raised. For people can make a surprising amount of noise in the woods. Zippers, boots, cookware, laughter, someone always asking where the lighter went. But that evening, while we sat less than 50 yards away, another camper assembled an entire tent without snapping a branch, driving a stake, or disturbing a single bird. And by the third night, we understood that the tent was not getting closer to our campsite. Our campsite was getting closer to it. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 32 when this happened, and I worked as an insurance claims adjuster in Portland. I spent most of my days looking at photographs of damaged houses and listening to people explain why a flooded basement had ruined their lives. That autumn, I needed distance from phones, traffic, and other people's disasters. My college friend Aaron suggested a 3-night camping trip in the Cascade foothills. His girlfriend, Maya, came with us, along with my younger sister, Lucy. Lucy was 26 and had recently separated from her husband. She told our parents she wanted fresh air. She told me privately that she was afraid to spend another weekend alone in her apartment. So I agreed to go. The campground sat beside a narrow lake surrounded by hemlock and fir. It was officially maintained, but only barely. Each site had a fire ring, a wooden table, and a flat patch of earth worn smooth by old tents. There were no showers, no electricity, and no phone signal. When we arrived on Friday afternoon, rain hung in the sky without falling. The air smelled of wet bark and cold stone. Mist rested on the lake, turning the opposite shore into a gray blur. Our site was the last one on the loop. Beyond it, the gravel road narrowed into an abandoned service track marked with a rusted chain. The forest there looked older. The trunks were darker, the undergrowth thicker, and the ground sloped toward a stand of dead trees near the water. Perfect, Aaron said, dropping his pack. No neighbors on one side. Maya stared toward the chain track. Why close a road unless something's wrong with it? Budget cuts, Aaron said. Serial killer, Lucy replied. Maya pointed at her. Finally, someone sensible. We set up 2 tents, mine beside Aaron's, with Lucy and Maya sharing the larger one. By 6, darkness had settled early beneath the trees. The temperature dropped sharply, and smoke from our fire stayed low, stinging our eyes. We ate chili from metal bowls while Aaron told a story about getting lost in Yosemite as a teenager. Lucy laughed harder than the story deserved, and I remember feeling relieved. It was the first time I had heard her laugh in weeks. Then Maya stopped eating. Was that there before? She was looking past me. At the edge of the trees, between our site and the chain service road, stood a small green tent. It was perhaps 50 yards away, partly hidden behind a cedar. Its fabric looked dark with moisture. The entrance faced our fire. I turned to Aaron. You said there was no one nearby. There wasn't. Maybe they arrived while we were cooking, Lucy said. No car passed, Maya replied. The campground had only one road. Any arriving camper would have driven directly behind us. Aaron stood and cupped his hands around his mouth. Hey, you need a hand over there. No answer came. The forest seemed to absorb his voice. Even the lake was silent. Aaron shrugged and sat down. Probably walked in. With a tent. Maya asked, from where? No one answered. Later, while brushing my teeth near the table, I noticed the green tent had no rain fly, no lantern, and no gear outside. The ground around it was covered in damp needles, yet I could not see a path leading toward it. I slept poorly. At some point after midnight, I woke to a soft, dragging sound. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. It came from outside, moving slowly around my tent. I held my breath and listened. Aaron snored faintly beside me. Wind pressed branches together overhead, but the dragging sound was lower, deliberate. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. I reached for my flashlight. Before I switched it on, a shadow crossed the nylon wall. It was narrow and tall, human-shaped. It stopped directly outside my entrance. I waited for a voice, a cough, anything. Instead, 3 fingertips pressed gently into the fabric. They remained there for several seconds, making shallow dents above my face. Then they withdrew. I did not unzip the tent. At dawn, Aaron found me sitting awake in my sleeping bag. "You look terrible," he said. I told him what happened. He listened without interrupting, then stepped outside. There were no footprints around my tent. The soil was soft enough to preserve the tread of every boot we wore, but the only tracks belonged to us. Lucy examined the ground. Maybe a branch touched the tent. A branch with 3 fingers? I asked. She looked toward the green tent. Its entrance was still closed. We spent the morning hiking to a waterfall 2 miles north. The trail was slick, and the woods smelled of mushrooms and decaying leaves. For several hours, nothing strange happened. Aaron teased me about the shadow, Maya photographed the creek, and Lucy seemed almost like herself again. When we returned near sunset, all 4 of us stopped at the edge of the campsite. The green tent was still there, but it was no longer beside the chained road. It stood behind our fire ring, closer by at least 20 yards. Aaron stared at it. "That's not possible." Maya walked backward until she bumped into the table. "Someone moved it." "Why?" Lucy whispered. We approached together. The tent was old-fashioned, made from heavy canvas rather than nylon. Its color had faded unevenly, and black mildew stained the seams. No stakes held it down. Aaron crouched near the entrance. "Hello." Something moved inside. Not a person shifting. More like wet fabric sliding over wet fabric. Maya grabbed his shoulder. "Don't open it." Aaron looked at me. His usual confidence had disappeared. We backed away. That evening, none of us wanted a fire. The orange light made the trees beyond it seem darker, and the tent stood at the edge of every glance. We ate cold sandwiches inside my tent. Around 9, Lucy realized her red scarf was missing. She had worn it on the hike. We searched our tents and packs, then checked around the table. Maya found it tied to the zipper of the green tent. The knot was tight and unfamiliar. Lucy began to cry. "I want to leave." I did too, but rain had started, thick and hard, hammering the leaves. The campground road crossed a low wooden bridge near the entrance. Driving it in darkness during a storm seemed reckless. "We leave at first light," I said. "All of us." Aaron nodded immediately. No one slept. Shortly after 2 in the morning, the rain stopped. A voice came from outside. "Daniel." It sounded like Lucy. I turned toward her sleeping bag. She was beside me, eyes open. The voice came again from the green tent. "Daniel, please." Lucy covered her mouth. It used her voice perfectly, but there was something beneath it, a faint crackling, like ice breaking on a pond. Then it spoke in Aaron's voice. "Come help me." Aaron pressed both hands against his ears. The green tent began to collapse inward. Not downward, inward, as though something inside were pulling the canvas toward a single point. The poles bent without snapping. The walls tightened, folded, and vanished into darkness. Then the tent stood upright again. Its entrance was open. A man crouched inside. I could see only part of him in the beam of my flashlight. He wore a soaked yellow jacket and mud-covered hiking boots. His head hung forward, hiding his face. Lucy whispered, "Who are you?" The man lifted one hand. He pointed behind us. Our tents were gone. The fire ring, Table and car were gone too. We stood in a clearing I did not recognize, surrounded by dead trees. The green tent sat at the center. Cold air rolled from its entrance, carrying the smell of lake water and something metallic. The man raised his head. His face was pale and swollen, his eyes filmed white. A deep indentation crushed one side of his skull, but no blood marked him. He looked directly at Lucy. Then he crawled out. I grabbed her and ran. Branches tore at my jacket. Maya screamed behind me, and Aaron shouted for us to stay together. The forest seemed to rearrange itself as we moved. Every direction led back to the same clearing. Each time we saw the green tent, it was already waiting. The man was always kneeling beside it. On our fourth return, he was closer. On our fifth, he was standing. On our sixth, he had Lucy's red scarf wrapped around his neck. "She has to stay," he said in my voice. I turned and faced him. No, he tilted his head. Behind him, the tent entrance widened. Inside it, I saw dark water rippling beneath a thin skin of ice. A crushed vehicle lay upside down under the surface. Someone pounded against the submerged window. The man reached for Lucy. I stepped between them and struck him with my flashlight. The beam passed through his shoulder as if through fog, but the impact drove a shock of cold through my arm. Images burst into my mind. Headlights sliding across ice, screaming metal, freezing water filling lungs, a hand clawing toward an opening that never came. I understood only one thing. He had been the last person to arrive at this campground, and he needed someone else to become the last. I shoved Lucy toward Aaron and stepped closer to the tent. "Take me." The man stopped. For the first time, his white eyes focused. The cold around us deepened until my teeth hurt. Then Lucy grabbed my arm. "No," she said. "We leave together." Aaron and Maya seized us both. The four of us ran toward the tent instead of away from it. As we reached the entrance, the man screamed with all our voices at once. We plunged through darkness and hit wet gravel. Morning light surrounded us. We were lying beside our car. A park ranger found us minutes later. We were soaked, hypothermic, and nearly incoherent. Our tents had vanished, along with most of our equipment. At the ranger station, an older ranger named Collins listened without smiling. When I described the yellow jacket, he went quiet. 17 years earlier, a camper named Peter Vale had arrived after the campground had officially closed for winter. His car slid off the service road, broke through thin ice, and sank near the abandoned section of the lake. His body was recovered in spring. His tent was never found. The campground closed the site after several visitors reported seeing it appear between occupied campsites. We never camped together again. Lucy eventually reconciled with her husband. Aaron and Maya moved away. None of us speaks about that weekend unless absolutely necessary. But every October, on the anniversary of the accident, I wake to the sound of canvas tightening outside my bedroom window. This morning, there were wet pine needles across my carpet and a red scarf tied around the handle of my front door. And in the backyard, where there was nothing when I went to sleep, a green tent is waiting for the last person to come home. Story 2. I still wake up smelling smoke, even though the doctors told me there was none in my lungs. They said exposure, dehydration, and panic could explain the confusion. They said the burns on my palms probably came from grabbing hot stones. What they could not explain was why the fire pit they found me beside had not been used in more than 20 years. My name is Ethan Cole. I was 34 when this happened, and at the time I worked as a building inspector in Spokane. My job was ordinary, repetitive, and mostly indoors. I spent my weeks measuring stair heights, checking smoke alarms, and arguing with contractors about permits. That September, after my father died, I started taking long solo hikes. He had been the person I called whenever something broke, frightened me, or made no sense. After the funeral, I kept reaching for my phone before remembering there was no one to answer. The trip into the Selkirk wilderness was supposed to clear my head. I planned 4 nights on an old loop trail that crossed a high valley, past 2 alpine lakes, and returned through a burned section of forest. I had mapped the route carefully and left a printed itinerary with my sister, Rachel. At the ranger station, a woman named Denise checked my permit. She was broad-shouldered, gray-haired, and had the flat, patient voice of someone used to rescuing overconfident hikers. "You're alone?" she asked. "Yes." "Satellite messenger?" I tapped the device clipped to my shoulder strap. "Good. Weather turns quickly up there." A younger ranger behind her looked up from his computer. His name tag read Luis. "You camping in Crow Valley?" "Second and third nights." He glanced at Denise. It was quick, but I noticed. "What?" I asked. Luis shrugged. "Nothing. Just stay on the marked sites." Denise slid my permit across the counter. "And don't follow lights after dark." I laughed because I thought it was a joke. Neither of them did. The first day passed without trouble. The trail climbed through cedar and larch, the air cool enough to sting my nose. Wet moss softened my footsteps. Somewhere below, water moved over stones with a steady whisper. By late afternoon, I reached Crow Valley. It was wider than I expected, a long bowl between 2 mountain ridges. The western slope was thick with trees, while the eastern side rose sharply in exposed rock and pale grass. A narrow creek wound through the center, reflecting the sky like broken metal. My designated campsite sat on a ledge above the creek. From there, I could see almost the entire opposite slope. I pitched my tent, filtered water, and cooked noodles while the temperature dropped. Just after sunset, I saw the fire. It burned across the valley, perhaps half a mile away, in a small clearing between the trees. The flames were bright orange against the blue darkness. I felt relieved. Knowing another person was nearby made the wilderness seem less empty. I raised one arm and waved, though I doubted anyone could see me. A moment later, shadows moved around the fire. 3, maybe 4 people. Then I heard laughter. It crossed the valley unnaturally clearly. A man laughed first, deep and rough. A woman answered with a high, breathless giggle. Another voice joined them, younger, almost childlike. The sound made me smile. For several minutes, I listened while cleaning my pot. Then the laughter stopped. Not gradually. All at once. The figures around the fire turned in my direction. I could not see faces, only dark shapes. One of them raised an arm. I raised mine back. The figure kept lifting its arm higher than a shoulder should allow. It stretched above its head, thin and crooked, until the hand seemed level with the lowest branches. I stepped closer to my own fire. The figure lowered its arm. Then every shadow disappeared. The flames continued burning unattended. I told myself distance had distorted what I saw. Darkness changed proportions. Trees moved. People walked away. Still, I kept looking across the valley until the fire faded shortly before midnight. The next morning, curiosity pulled me toward the clearing. Crossing the valley took almost an hour. The creek was wider than it looked, and the ground beyond it was marshy. My boots sank into black mud that smelled of stagnant water and rotting grass. When I reached the place where I had seen the fire, I found a ring of stones. They were gray, dry, and cold. Inside the ring lay pine needles, small twigs, and a layer of undisturbed moss. There was no ash, no wood, no footprints. I walked circles around the clearing, expecting to find some sign of a campsite. Flattened grass, food wrappers, tent stakes, anything. The forest floor was untouched. Then I noticed 4 shallow depressions in the moss around the ring. Not footprints, sitting places, as if people had rested there for hours without using chairs or logs. I returned to my campsite uneasy but not frightened. I convinced myself I had misjudged the location. There were dozens of similar clearings on that slope. That afternoon, I met two hikers near the creek. They were brothers from Idaho named Nate and Colin. Nate was talkative and sunburned. Colin barely spoke and carried an expensive camera on his chest. "You alone up here?" Nate asked. "Yeah." "You staying in the valley?" "No, heading north. We heard people last night, though." My stomach tightened. "What kind of people?" "Sounded like a party," Nate said. "Laughing. Singing, maybe." Colin looked past me toward the eastern trees. "There weren't any lights," he said. "I saw a fire," I replied. Colin met my eyes. "Where?" I pointed. He lifted his camera and zoomed toward the slope. After a long moment, he lowered it. "There's no campsite over there." Nate laughed. "Well, mystery solved. Ghost campers." Colin did not laugh. Before leaving, he said quietly, "We heard someone calling from the creek around 2. Sounded like a man asking for his daughter. My father used to call me son in a particular way when he was worried. Softly, almost apologetically." I thought about that after they left. On the second night, the fire returned. Same clearing. Same brightness. This time, the shadows were already seated around it. I counted 5. The laughter began soon after dark. I stayed inside my tent and tried to read, but every few minutes the sound changed. Sometimes it seemed far away. Sometimes it came from directly behind me. At 9, my satellite messenger beeped. The screen displayed an incoming message from Rachel. "Are you okay? Your device sent SOS." I stared at it. I had not pressed the emergency button. I typed back, "I'm fine. Device error. Do not call rescue." Before I could send it, another message appeared. "Ethan, who is with you?" The laughter across the valley stopped. I looked through the tent mesh. One of the shadows stood outside the firelight, closer to my side of the valley. I sent the message to Rachel and checked the SOS cover. It was closed and locked. Then my father's voice came from the creek. "Ethan." I froze. The voice was faint but unmistakable. "Son, come down here." My throat closed. I knew it could not be him. I knew that with the calm, logical part of my mind. But grief is not logical. For one terrible second, I wanted to answer. The voice came again. I fell. I unzipped the tent before I realized what I was doing. Cold wind struck my face. At the edge of my campsite stood a man-shaped shadow. Behind it, across the valley, 4 figures still sat around the fire. The 5th had crossed over. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it forward. Nothing was there, but wet footprints appeared in the dirt. One after another. They formed as I watched, climbing from the creek toward my tent. Each print was bare. Water filled them instantly. I backed away. "Ethan," my father called from the darkness. "Please." The voice cracked exactly as his had in the hospital. I began crying before I could stop myself. "You're not him," I said. The footprints reached my fire ring. My small cooking fire went out. Across the valley, the larger fire flared high enough to light the trees. For a moment, I saw the people around it clearly. Their clothes were old, soaked, and hanging from their bodies. Their faces were turned toward me, but the skin looked smooth, without eyes or mouths. Except for one. The standing figure had my father's face. He smiled. I ran. I left the tent, food, and most of my gear behind. I carried only my backpack, headlamp, and messenger. The trail south should have led out of the valley. Instead, after 20 minutes of downhill movement, I saw orange light through the trees. The fire waited ahead of me. The figures sat around it. I turned and ran uphill. The same clearing appeared again. No matter which direction I chose, the forest bent me back toward the flames. The laughter grew louder each time. On my 4th return, one figure stood and pointed to an empty place beside the fire. On my 5th, 2 stood. On my 6th, I heard Rachel screaming somewhere behind me. I stopped running. The fire crackled without consuming the logs beneath it. The wood looked wet and black, yet the flames moved across it like living fingers. My father's face watched me from the opposite side. "You left me alone," it said. The words struck harder than any scream. I had left the hospital for 1 hour on the final night of his life. I had gone home to shower. He died before I returned. No one else knew how deeply I hated myself for that. I stepped toward the fire. The figures leaned forward. Then I noticed their shadows. They did not fall behind them. They stretched toward me, long and thin, reaching across the ground like ropes. One wrapped around my ankle. The cold was immediate and absolute. I saw flashes of strangers wandering through darkness. A family huddled beneath a fallen tree. 2 hunters following distant voices. A boy searching for his mother. All of them ending at the same fire. I dropped to my knees and drove both hands into the flames. There was no heat at first, only freezing water. My fingers sank through the light and closed around something beneath the logs. A human wrist. I pulled. The fire screamed. Every voice erupted at once. My father, Rachel, the rangers, the hikers, and dozens I did not know. The wrist tore free. It was blackened and thin, still wearing a rusted metal watch. The flames vanished. So did the figures. I woke at dawn beside the cold stone ring across the valley. My palms were blistered. My clothes were soaked. The watch lay beside me. Rangers reached me that afternoon after Rachel reported the false SOS. Denise and Louise found my abandoned campsite first, then followed my tracks across the creek. They told me the clearing had once been used by a backcountry guide named Walter Venn. In 1998, he led a family of 4 into the valley during an early snowstorm. None of them came back. Searchers later found Venn's watch near a fire ring, but no bodies were ever recovered. I showed Luis the watch I had pulled from the flames. He went pale. Then he asked where the rest of the people were. I told him there had been no people, only shadows. I never returned to Crow Valley. Nate and Colin were reported missing 2 weeks after I met them. Their final camera image showed a campfire burning in daylight, surrounded by 5 seated figures. There should have been 6. Last night, Rachel called me at 2:13 a.m. She was crying and asking why I was standing at the edge of her backyard. I told her I was home. Then, through the phone, I heard my own laughter coming from somewhere beside her fire pit. Story 3. The woman came to our campsite at 12:47 in the morning, carrying a lantern that had no flame. By sunrise, our tents, food, fire ring, and even the logs we had cut were sitting in a different part of the forest. What frightened me most was not that we had been moved. It was that something had arranged us in the exact place where the woman had died. My name is Marcus Hale. I was 37 when this happened, and I worked as a maintenance supervisor for an apartment complex outside Eugene, Oregon. I was married, had an 8-year-old daughter named Sophie, and had not taken a real vacation in almost 4 years. The camping trip was my brother Ryan's idea. He was younger than me by 6 years, impulsive, loud, and convinced that every problem could be solved with fresh air or beer. His girlfriend, Tessa, came with him. She was practical and observant, the kind of person who always carried extra batteries and checked weather reports twice. My old coworker Ben joined us too. Ben was quiet, broad-shouldered, and had recently gone through a divorce he never discussed. We chose Alder Ridge Forest because it was remote but not completely wild. A gravel road wound through the lower section, and several primitive campsites sat along an old logging trail. There were no toilets, no electricity, and no ranger patrol after dark, but the nearest highway was only 9 miles away. At least, that was what the map showed. We arrived in late October, when the leaves had turned the color of rust and old blood. The air smelled of wet soil, cedar, and wood smoke drifting from somewhere far beyond the ridge. Clouds pressed low over the treetops, flattening the afternoon light into a dull gray haze. Our campsite lay beside a narrow creek. Moss covered the stones, and black ferns leaned over the water. The ground was soft but level, surrounded by tall Douglas firs marked with pale streaks of lichen. "There's nobody for miles," Ryan said as he unloaded the cooler. "That's usually how missing person stories begin," Tessa replied. Ryan grinned. "That's why I brought Marcus. He's slower than me." I threw a rolled sleeping bag at him. We set up 3 tents around a stone fire ring. Ben worked without speaking, chopping fallen branches into neat lengths. Tessa hung a lantern from a low limb. Ryan opened a beer before his tent was fully raised. For a while, it felt exactly like the trip I had needed. We grilled sausages, listened to the creek, and talked about things that had nothing to do with rent, work orders, custody schedules, or money. Ryan made Sophie laugh over a video call by pretending a pine cone was a forest rat. Before losing signal, she said, "Bring me something spooky." I promised I would. That promise stayed in my mind later. Around 11, the temperature dropped hard. Our breath turned white, and the damp air settled through our jackets. We let the fire burn low and climbed into our tents. I shared with Ben. Ryan and Tessa used the larger tent across from us. I had nearly fallen asleep when I heard footsteps. They came slowly from the logging trail. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. The rhythm was too careful for an animal. Ben opened his eyes. "You hear that?" I nodded. The footsteps stopped just outside the firelight. A woman's voice called softly, "Excuse me." Ryan unzipped his tent. "What is it?" An elderly woman stood beyond the fire ring. She looked at least 80. She wore a long brown coat buttoned to her throat and a faded yellow scarf wrapped over her hair. One hand held an old metal lantern. The other rested against her chest. Her face was narrow and deeply lined. Ash-colored dust coated her cheeks. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said. "Do you have a match?" Tessa crawled out behind Ryan. "Are you camping nearby?" The woman looked toward the trees. My light went out. "That doesn't answer the question," Tessa said. The woman smiled, but only slightly. "I just need one match." Ben stepped beside me. There was something strange about the lantern. Its glass was blackened from the inside, yet when the woman moved it, I saw no wick or fuel chamber. Ryan reached for the matchbox near the firewood. Tessa caught his wrist. "Wait." He frowned. "She's an old woman. At 1 in the morning, she could be lost." I looked at the woman's boots. They were dry. The trail was covered in mud, and the creek crossing behind her was ankle deep. Yet there was not a spot of dirt on her coat or shoes. "Where did you come from?" I asked. She turned her eyes toward me. They were not cloudy like an old person's. They were clear, dark, and fixed on my face. From where the fire stopped, a gust of wind moved through the campsite. The flames in our fire ring flattened sideways. The woman held out her hand. "Please." Ben spoke quietly. "We should walk her to the road." The woman's expression changed. For an instant, anger tightened her mouth. Then she smiled again. "No road tonight." Ryan pulled a match from the box. Tessa whispered, "Don't." He struck it against the side. The flame jumped alive. The woman raised her lantern. As Ryan touched the match to its opening, the fire turned blue. A sound rushed through the trees like 1,000 people inhaling at once. The lantern ignited, not with a small flame, but with a column of orange light that filled the glass from top to bottom. Shapes moved inside it. Tiny hands pressed against the blackened panes and vanished. Ryan dropped the match. The woman lowered the lantern. "Thank you," she said. Then she stepped backward into the darkness. We watched the light recede through the trees. No branches moved around her. No footsteps followed. Within seconds, the lantern disappeared. Tessa rounded on Ryan. "What were you thinking?" She needed help. She wasn't normal. Ryan laughed nervously. "You're seriously scared of someone's grandmother?" Ben crouched beside the fire ring. The match Ryan had dropped was still burning. It lay in wet soil, flame upright, refusing to go out. Ben smothered it with his boot. A smell rose from the ground. Not sulfur. Burned hair. None of us slept well after that. I woke before dawn to heat against my face. At first, I thought the campfire had flared. Then I noticed the light through the tent fabric. It was red. I unzipped the entrance. Our campsite was surrounded by burned trees. The green forest was gone. Every trunk within sight stood black and bare, twisted against a colorless sky. Ash covered the earth in a thick, soft layer. The creek had vanished. In its place lay a dry trench filled with charred stones. Our tents, cooler, chairs, and firewood were exactly where we had left them. But the landscape had changed. Ryan stumbled from his tent. What happened? Tessa followed him and stopped dead. Ben checked his phone. No signal. There was no burn area near the campsite, I said. We would have seen it. Tessa walked to the edge of the clearing and looked down. Marcus! I joined her. Our original campsite was visible through the trees below us. I recognized the creek, the mossy stones, and the circle of flattened grass where the tents had stood. It was at least 400 yards away. We had been moved uphill during the night. All of us. Everything. There were no drag marks through the ash. No tire tracks. No footprints except ours. Ryan's face had gone pale. We sleepwalked. With 3 tents. Ben asked. We moved everything. In the dark, Ryan shouted. Then explain it. A faint metallic tapping came from deeper in the burned forest. Tink. 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 The sound of someone striking a matchbox. Tessa grabbed my sleeve. We need to leave now. We packed only what we could carry quickly. Our car was parked beside the original campsite, but the slope between us and it was steep. As we moved downhill, ash puffed around our boots. It coated our tongues and made the air taste bitter. The silence was complete. No birds. No insects. No wind. Halfway down, Ben stopped. There were footprints ahead of us. Small, narrow shoe prints pressed into the ash. They led uphill, toward the place we had just left. We followed them backward with our eyes. They began near the car. The woman had walked from our original campsite to the burned clearing. But beside her tracks were 4 long grooves, as though she had dragged our tents behind her. Ryan whispered, I'm sorry. From somewhere above us, the woman laughed. It was a dry, breathless sound. The burned trees began to crack. Orange light appeared beneath their bark. At first, I thought dawn was reflecting from the trunks. Then thin lines of fire spread upward through the wood, glowing from the inside. The forest was reigniting around us. Run, Ben shouted. We scrambled downhill. Heat rolled over my back. Branches snapped overhead. The ash beneath our boots grew hot enough to smoke. Ryan slipped near the dry creek bed. His ankle twisted under him, and he screamed. Ben and I lifted him between us. Tessa ran ahead, waving through the smoke. The car's gone. I thought she meant she could not see it. Then I reached the original clearing. The car was not there. In its place stood the old woman. Her lantern burned beside her leg. Behind her, the campsite had returned. Our tents stood around the fire ring, perfectly arranged, as if we had never moved them. She looked at Ryan. One match, she said. One traveler. No, I told her. Her eyes shifted toward me. The fire behind us roared closer. I thought of Sophie waiting at home. I pictured her sitting at the kitchen counter, asking what spooky thing I had brought her. The woman lifted the lantern. Inside the glass, faces twisted in the flame. Men, women, children, all silently opening their mouths. Ben picked up a stone and threw it. It passed through the woman's shoulder. Her coat rippled like smoke. The lantern struck the ground but did not break. The flames inside spilled across the dirt, spreading in a perfect circle around Ryan. He screamed as the ash beneath him began to glow. I grabbed the lantern handle. Cold shot through my hand. The forest vanished. For 1 second, I stood in the same clearing decades earlier. Families ran between canvas tents while flames swept through the trees. A younger version of the woman stumbled through the smoke, banging on car windows, begging for help. Vehicles sped past her toward the road. Nobody stopped. She fell beside a lantern, still holding an unlit match. Then I was back. I understood what she wanted. Not kindness. Company. I tore the matchbox from Ryan's pocket and held it over the lantern flame. The woman stared at me. "You asked for one," I said. "You already got it." I dropped the entire box into the lantern. Every match ignited at once. The woman shrieked. Her body opened like burned paper, folding inward around the light. The faces inside the lantern screamed with her. A blast of hot air threw me backward. Then everything went dark. I woke beside the creek with Tessa shaking me. The green forest had returned. Our tents were back in their original places. The car stood beside the trail. Ryan's ankle was badly sprained, and my right hand was blistered in the shape of the lantern handle. We drove straight to the ranger station. The ranger on duty, a man named Cole, listened with growing unease. When I described the woman, he pulled an old newspaper clipping from a file cabinet. Her name had been Edith Farlow. In 1971, a wildfire swept through an illegal campground on Alder Ridge. Edith became separated from her family while trying to warn other campers. Her body was found 400 yards uphill from the campground. She was holding an empty lantern. Over the years, several campers reported meeting an elderly woman asking for matches. Those who helped her woke in the burned site. 2 groups were never seen again. We never returned to Alder Ridge. Ryan stopped camping completely. Ben moved to Arizona. Tessa still calls me every October to ask whether I have smelled smoke. Last week, Sophie turned 12. At her birthday dinner, she handed me a small package she said she had found outside our front door. Inside was an old metal matchbox filled with blackened wooden matches. On the lid, scratched in a careful hand, were the words, "You still owe me one traveler." Tonight, Sophie's bedroom smells like smoke, and an elderly woman is tapping softly on her window, asking my daughter to let her light the way. Story 4. The thing outside our tent walked like a person trying to remember how legs worked. It circled us for 7 hours, always at the same slow pace, never speaking, never leaving. At sunrise, I found its footprints pressed into the mud around our campsite. They were human footprints. Every one of them pointed in the opposite direction from the way it had been walking. My name is Nathan Cole. I was 38 when this happened, and I worked as an appliance repair technician in Boise. I was not an experienced outdoorsman, but I knew enough to camp safely. I had spent years promising my wife, Jenna, that I would take more time away from work, so when our son Eli turned 10, I planned a weekend trip in the Sawtooth backcountry. My younger sister, Claire, came with us. She taught elementary school, carried a whistle on her backpack, and treated every hike like a field trip. She was patient with Eli in ways I sometimes struggled to be. The trail led to a small basin surrounded by lodgepole pine and granite slopes. An old ranger map marked a primitive campsite near a shallow lake, 3 miles from the road. We arrived in late afternoon beneath a sky the color of dirty glass. The air was cold enough to make my fingers stiff, and the forest smelled of wet pine bark and crushed sage. Wind moved high through the treetops, but barely touched the ground, leaving the lower woods unnaturally still. The campsite looked unused. A rusted fire ring sat beneath 2 leaning pines. The ground was flat and soft from recent rain. Beyond the clearing, the trees crowded close together, their trunks thin and gray in the fading light. "This is perfect," Eli said. Jenna gave me a doubtful look. "It's very isolated." That was the point. That doesn't make it comforting. Claire dropped her pack beside the fire ring. We're 3 miles from the car, not crossing Antarctica. We set up one large family tent and a smaller tent for Claire. Eli collected sticks while I hung our food bag away from camp. Jenna checked the forecast on the last bar of signal before her phone went dead. No rain tonight, she said. Temperature near freezing. We ate soup and grilled bread beside the fire. Eli told us a ridiculous story about a creature he had invented called the elbow deer, which supposedly walked backward and attacked hikers with its joints. Claire laughed. That is the worst monster I've ever heard. It only comes out when people insult it, Eli said. Then I take it back. The laughter helped. By 9, the temperature had fallen sharply. Frost formed along the edge of the picnic log. We extinguished the fire, checked the food bag, and climbed into our tents. I lay beside Jenna while Eli slept at our feet. For the first hour, I heard only normal forest sounds. Branches creaking, a distant owl, small animals moving through dry leaves. Then came the first step. Crunch. It was close enough that I opened my eyes. Another followed. Crunch. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Jenna whispered, "Did you hear that?" I nodded, then realized she could not see me. It's probably a deer. The footsteps moved past the rear of the tent. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Whatever it was seemed to be walking in a circle around us. Eli shifted inside his sleeping bag. "Dad, go back to sleep." "Is that a bear?" Jenna's hand closed around my wrist. The footsteps stopped outside the entrance. I reached for the bear spray near my pillow. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then the nylon wall pressed inward. Not sharply, as if touched by a paw. A long section of fabric slowly bowed toward us, tracing the shape of something tall and narrow leaning against the tent. Jenna covered Eli's mouth before he could speak. The pressure lifted. The footsteps resumed. They continued around Claire's smaller tent. I heard her zipper move slightly. "Claire," I whispered loudly. "Stay inside." "I am," she answered. Her voice sounded tight. The steps returned toward us. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. I tried to estimate the size of the animal by the sound. A bear would sniff, huff, or disturb the brush. This thing moved with careful precision, placing each foot in nearly the same places. I switched on my headlamp and aimed it through the mesh window. The beam lit tree trunks and drifting mist. Nothing else. The footsteps continued within the light, but I could not see what made them. At midnight, they stopped again. A faint clicking sound came from the ground beside my head. 3 clicks. Pause. 3 more. It sounded like fingernails tapping stones together. Then a voice whispered from outside. "Eli." My son became rigid. The voice was soft and dry, barely louder than leaves rubbing together. "Eli, come look." Jenna pulled him against her. I raised the bear spray. "Who's out there?" The clicking stopped. Claire called from her tent. "Nathan." That sounded like Mom. Our mother had died 6 years earlier. I said nothing. The footsteps began again. This time they were faster. Crunch. 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 They circled our tents, moving at a brisk walking pace. Each loop became tighter. Dirt scraped against the nylon. Tent stakes pulled at the earth. Eli started crying silently. I leaned close to him. "We're okay. We stay together. We don't open the tent. What if it gets in?" "It won't." I said it because he needed to hear it, not because I believed it. At 1 in the morning, something dragged across the roof. A hand-shaped depression moved from the entrance toward the back, each finger impossibly long. It paused above Eli. Then the fabric lifted as though pinched between 2 fingers. The entire tent shuddered. I fired the bear spray through the mesh vent. The orange cloud blew outside. A sound came from the darkness. Not a roar. A man laughing while choking. The footsteps retreated into the trees. For 10 minutes, the forest was silent. Then Claire screamed. Her tent collapsed inward. I unzipped our entrance and ran outside with the spray in one hand and a flashlight in the other. Cold air hit my face. The clearing was empty. Claire's tent had folded over her as if someone had stepped directly onto it. She thrashed beneath the fabric. I pulled her free. "What happened?" "Someone sat on me," she gasped. It whispered that I was facing the wrong way. A branch snapped at the edge of the clearing. My flashlight caught movement between two pines. I saw the back of a person. Tall. Thin. Bareheaded. It stood facing away from us. Then it stepped toward us without turning. Its knees bent backward. Its heels lifted where toes should have been. It moved smoothly, body facing the forest while its legs carried it into the clearing. Claire whispered, "Oh God." The flashlight flickered. When the beam returned, the figure was gone. We moved into the large tent together. No one suggested leaving. The trail was rocky and poorly marked, and whatever surrounded us moved faster than we could. At 2, the footsteps returned. Now there were 2 sets, one circling clockwise, one moving the opposite way. Their rhythms crossed outside the entrance. A few minutes later, a third joined them, then a fourth. The campsite filled with slow walking. Eli pressed his face into my chest. "They want us to turn around," he whispered. "How do you know?" "They keep saying it." I heard nothing but footsteps. Jenna stared at him. "What are they saying?" Eli lifted his head. "They say we came into the valley forward, so we have to leave backward." Before I could answer, the tent entrance unzipped itself. The metal pole slid downward inch by inch. I grabbed it and held on. Something tugged from outside. The force was steady, almost gentle. Then another hand pressed against the tent behind me. Another beside Jenna. More shapes appeared around the walls until we were surrounded by the impressions of palms. All the hands pointed downward, fingers where wrists should have been. Claire began reciting our mother's old bedtime prayer. Her voice shook, but did not stop. The pulling on the zipper strengthened. My grip slipped. A narrow gap opened. Through it, I saw bare feet standing outside. The toes faced away from the tent. The body above them faced toward me. I could not understand the shape. My eyes kept trying to correct it. Its torso twisted from the waist, shoulders facing forward while hips and legs pointed backward. Its arms hung too low, fingertips brushing the ground. Its face looked human only in pieces. The eyes were where they belonged, but the mouth ran vertically from chin to nose. It whispered in my mother's voice, "Turn around, Nathan." I sprayed directly into its face. The figure recoiled. Every set of footsteps stopped. The forest erupted with a sound like hundreds of people inhaling through broken teeth. "Now," I shouted. We ran. I carried Eli. Jenna held the flashlight, and Claire followed with her whistle clamped between her teeth, blowing repeatedly. Instead of taking the trail normally, I remembered what Eli had said. "Walk backward." Jenna stared at me. "Are you serious?" "Do it." We turned our backs to the trail and moved downhill facing the campsite. It was clumsy and dangerous. Roots caught our heels. Branches struck our shoulders. I nearly fell twice while holding Eli. But the figures stayed at the edge of the clearing. There were more than I could count. Men, women, and children stood with their bodies facing us and their feet pointing into the woods behind them. Some wore old hiking clothes. Others looked as if they had been dressed decades earlier. None followed. As we backed farther down the trail, they slowly raised their hands. Every palm faced the wrong direction. We walked backward until dawn. When sunlight finally reached the trees, the pressure in the air vanished. Birds began calling. Wind moved through the branches. We reached the car exhausted and bruised. A ranger found us beside the road an hour later. His name was Halvorsen, a quiet man in his 60s. When we told him where we had camped, he frowned. "There's no authorized site in that basin." I showed him the map. He studied it, then ran his thumb across the campsite symbol. "That marking was removed years ago." He told us that in 1984, a church hiking group became lost during an early snowstorm. 12 people entered the basin. Search teams found their tents, food, and clothing arranged neatly in a circle. No bodies were recovered. The only tracks at the site were bare human footprints. Every print pointed toward the campsite, even though the searchers could tell from the depth and stride that whoever made them had been walking away. Halvorsen returned with another ranger to collect our equipment. They found the tents flattened and our belongings scattered. Around the large tent were dozens of footprints, some adult, some child-sized, all backward. We never went camping again. For months, Eli slept facing the wall because he said it was safer if nothing could stand behind him. Claire refused to discuss the voice she heard. Jenna still checks the direction of footprints whenever she sees tracks in mud or snow. I tried to convince myself we escaped because we understood the rule. Last winter, that belief ended. I woke one morning and found a trail of wet footprints leading from our back door to Eli's bedroom. They looked as if someone had walked into the house. But when I followed them, I realized the toes pointed outside, and whatever made them had been walking deeper in. At the end of the trail, Eli was asleep in his bed, facing the wall. Something beneath his blanket was lying back to back with him. And when I whispered his name, both heads turned toward me without either body moving. Story 5. The campground was there when we went to sleep. By sunrise, the road, the cabins, the picnic tables, and every other camper had vanished, leaving my wife and me alone in a field of waist-high grass. The worst part was that one of their children had spent the entire evening insisting we had already died. My name is Thomas Reed. I was 35 when this happened, and I worked as a payroll administrator in Sacramento. My wife, Emily, was 33 and taught 4th grade. We had been married for 6 years, and that summer we were trying to recover from a miscarriage neither of us knew how to talk about. We decided to drive north for a quiet weekend in the mountains. No plans beyond hiking, sleeping outdoors, and staying away from people who might ask whether we were doing all right. We were not. The trouble began when a fallen tree blocked the road to our reserved campsite. It was late afternoon, and the sky had already darkened under thick clouds. Rain tapped steadily against the windshield. The forest on either side of the road was dense with red fir and cedar, their trunks black with moisture. Emily stared at the tree lying across the gravel. We can't move that. No, there was another campground 20 miles back, in the opposite direction. She sighed and checked her phone. No signal. I reversed until I found a wide patch of road. That was when we noticed the sign. It stood at the mouth of a narrow dirt track almost hidden by ferns. Willow Rest Campground Vacancies 2 miles. The sign was made of painted wood, with neat white letters and an arrow pointing into the trees. That wasn't on the map, Emily said. Neither was the fallen tree. Thomas, we have maybe an hour of light left. She looked toward the track. Rainwater ran down the sign in thin gray lines. 2 miles, she said. Then we turn around. The road was narrow but surprisingly smooth. The trees leaned over it, forming a tunnel of dripping branches. My headlights caught occasional signs nailed to trunks. Keep right. Quiet after 9. Welcome, travelers. That last one bothered me. Not guests. Travelers. After 10 minutes, the forest opened into a wide green meadow. The campground sat in the center. It was beautiful. A clear stream curved through the grass. Tall willows stood beside it, their leaves shining silver in the rain. About 15 campsites surrounded a large central fire pit. Small canvas tents and polished travel trailers occupied most of them. Warm lantern light glowed in the gathering dusk. People waved as we drove in. A man in a tan uniform stepped from a wooden office near the entrance. He wore a flat-brimmed cap and a narrow black tie. His hair was silver, his posture stiff. Evening. he said as I rolled down the window. Looking for a place? Yes. Our road was blocked. Storm damage. Happens every year. His name tag read Mr. Bell. He opened a cloth-bound ledger. One night. Probably, I said. He dipped a fountain pen into a small bottle of ink. Names. Thomas and Emily Reed. His pen stopped. Mr. Bell looked at Emily, then at me. Reed? Yes. Something in his expression tightened. Then he smiled. Site 12. No charge until morning. He handed me a brass tag stamped with the number. As we drove away, Emily whispered, "He looked like he recognized you. I have a common last name. You don't have a common face." Site 12 sat near the stream. Our neighboring campers were a cheerful middle-aged couple named Harold and June Parker. Their equipment looked immaculate but old. A heavy canvas tent, metal trunks, enamel plates, and folding chairs with striped fabric. Harold wore wool trousers held up by suspenders. June wore a flowered dress beneath a red raincoat. Newlyweds? June asked. 6 years, Emily replied. June smiled sadly. Still counts. Harold helped me raise our tent while Emily spoke with June. He was friendly, but there was something formal about him. He called me sir and apologized whenever he swore, which he did only once when a tent peg bent. A family occupied the next site. The father, Walter, had thick dark hair slicked to one side. His wife, Margaret, wore a pale cardigan and kept checking a wristwatch that had stopped at 8:16. Their daughter, Lucy, looked about 8. She stood beside our car, staring at the California license plate. "What year is it?" she asked. Emily smiled. "What year do you think it is?" Lucy looked toward her parents before whispering, "I'm not supposed to say." Margaret called sharply, "Lucy, leave them alone." The rain ended at sunset. Mist rose from the meadow, and the campground lights reflected in the stream. The central fire was lit just after dark. Everyone gathered around it. There were perhaps 30 campers, all dressed in clothes that looked as if they belonged in old family photographs. Men wore tucked shirts and high-waisted pants. Women wore skirts, cardigans, or carefully tied scarves. No one had a phone. No one had modern camping gear. A radio sat on a crate near the fire, playing quiet orchestral music through a haze of static. Emily leaned close to me. "This is some kind of historical reenactment. Without advertising. Maybe it's private. Then why were there signs?" Before she could answer, Harold handed me a glass bottle of cola. The label was faded and unfamiliar. "You folks headed west?" he asked. "South in the morning." His smile faded. "You shouldn't wait that long." June touched his arm. "Harold." He stared into the fire. "I only mean the storm may return." Across the flames, Lucy watched us. She held a rag doll with black yarn hair. Its face had been burned away. Walter noticed me looking. "She found that thing near the stream," he said. "Won't let it go." Lucy hugged the doll. "It found me." The radio crackled. For a second, the music stopped. A man's voice came through. "Emergency crews remain unable to reach Willow Rest Campground following the collapse. Mr. Bell struck the radio with his palm. The music returned. Nobody spoke. Emily stood. "We should get some sleep." June looked up at her. "Don't leave your tent after the bell." "What bell?" June gave Harold a frightened glance. "Mr. Bell rose beside the fire. His voice carried across the meadow. "Quiet hours begin at 9. Remain in your assigned sites until sunrise. If you hear someone calling from the road, do not answer." A few campers lowered their heads. I laughed weakly. That part of the historical experience. No one answered. We returned to our tent. Inside, Emily zipped the entrance and sat on her sleeping bag. "We're leaving. It's dark. I don't care. The road is narrow, and we don't know where it connects. I don't like these people. They're strange, not dangerous." Lucy asked what year it was. "She's a kid. And that radio?" I had no answer. Before we could decide, a bell rang outside. One deep metallic note rolled across the meadow. Every lantern in the campground went out. Darkness swallowed the tents. The fire vanished too, not fading or collapsing, but disappearing at once. Emily grabbed my arm. What happened? Stay here. Thomas, no. A car horn sounded from the road. 3 short blasts. Then a woman called from beyond the trees. Help us. Her voice was distant and panicked. Please. The bridge is gone. Other voices joined her. Children crying. Men shouting. Someone screaming for a rope. Our campsite remained silent. No tent opened. No flashlight appeared. The woman called again. Emily. My wife stiffened. The voice sounded exactly like her mother. Her mother had been dead for 9 years. Don't answer, I whispered. Something walked along the outside of our tent. Not footsteps. A dragging sound, wet and heavy. It stopped near Emily's head. Her mother's voice came through the nylon. Sweetheart, I found the baby. Emily made a sound like she had been struck. I pulled her against me. Don't listen. The fabric pressed inward. A hand shape appeared above her shoulder. It was small, with 5 tiny fingers. Emily began shaking. The voice changed. A child whispered, Mommy. Emily reached toward the wall. I caught her wrist. No. The little hand slid slowly down the tent. Then the dragging sound moved away. From the neighboring site came a zipper opening. June whispered urgently, Harold, don't. A man's voice called from the road. Dad. Harold sobbed. My boy. His tent opened. A moment later, someone screamed. The sound cut off with a loud rush of water. Every lantern in the campground flared back to life. I unzipped our tent. Harold's site was empty. The tent, chairs, trunks, and June were gone. Only wet grass remained. People stood outside their tents, staring toward the empty space. No one seemed surprised. June's voice came faintly from the stream. Harold, then something beneath the water laughed. Emily grabbed our car keys. We leave now. We ran to the car. The engine started, but the headlights revealed no entrance road. The meadow continued into solid forest where the road had been. Mr. Bell stood in front of us. He held his ledger against his chest. You cannot leave after the bell. I got out. Move. His face looked older than before. Gray skin sagged beneath his eyes. The ground is not finished with you. What does that mean? He opened the ledger. The pages were filled with names and dates. Some entries were written in black ink. Others appeared as dark water stains. Near the bottom, I saw our names. Thomas Reed, Emily Reed arrived. August 17th, 1956 departed. My throat tightened. That date is wrong. Mr. Bell looked toward the stream. You came late. The meadow trembled. A deep cracking noise rose from beneath the grass. Campers began emerging from their tents. Their faces had changed. Skin hung pale and swollen. Wet soil filled their mouths. Some had branches embedded in their clothing. Lucy stood among them, holding the burned doll. They stayed because the road disappeared, she said. What happened here? Emily asked. Lucy pointed toward the hillside. Rainwater poured through the trees, though the sky above us was clear. Mr. Bell closed the ledger. The dam failed. The hillside split open. A wall of black water rushed into the meadow. Campers screamed and ran, repeating movements they had made long ago. Walter lifted Lucy. Margaret fell beside the fire pit. Trailers rolled onto their sides. Mr. Bell remained still. You must reach the old road before the water reaches the bell. He pointed toward the stream. Beneath the surface, I saw a line of pale stones leading across. Emily and I ran. The water reached our ankles, then our knees. It was icy and filled with floating branches. Behind us, tents collapsed and lanterns spun through the current. Lucy appeared beside Emily. She was still dry. Take me with you, she said. Emily looked at me. The child's face was terrified. I reached for her. My hand passed through cold water. Lucy's expression changed. Her mouth filled with mud. "You promised," she said. "I never promised you anything." She looked at Emily. But she did. Emily stopped. I remembered their conversation while Harold and I raised the tent. "What did you tell her?" I shouted. Emily's face collapsed. She asked if I had children. I said I would have taken her home. Lucy held out the burned doll. "Then take me." The water rose to our waists. Emily reached for the doll. I knocked it from Lucy's hands. The child screamed. Every camper turned toward us, their faces stretched beneath the waterlogged skin. I dragged Emily across the submerged stones while hands rose from the flood around our legs. The bell began to ring. 1 strike. 2. 3. On the 4th, the water reached my chest. On the 5th, we reached the opposite bank. On the 6th, I pulled Emily beneath a fallen tree. The 7th strike never came. I opened my eyes in daylight. We were lying in an abandoned meadow. There was no campground, no stream, no office. Our tent and car stood alone in tall grass. The brass site tag was still in my pocket. We drove until we found a ranger station. A ranger named Collins listened to our story and showed us an old map. Willow Rest Campground had been destroyed in August 1956 when a temporary logging dam failed during a storm. 28 campers died. The campground was never rebuilt. One child, Lucy Warren, was never found. Collins showed us a photograph taken days before the disaster. The Parkers stood beside their canvas tent. Mr. Bell posed outside the office. Walter and Margaret smiled near the stream. Lucy stood in front of them. In her hands was the same burned doll. Emily and I rarely discussed that night. She became pregnant again the following spring, and our daughter, Grace, was born healthy. For 8 years, nothing happened. Then Grace brought home a drawing from school last week. It showed our family camping beside a stream. Behind us stood rows of old-fashioned tents and a little girl holding a black-faced doll. At the bottom, Grace had written, "Lucy says we are coming back." Last night, I woke to the sound of a bell, and when I looked outside, every house on our street had vanished except ours.